Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to episode 22 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. This week's episode is brought to you again by Church Revitalization University. It's an affordable online course that empowers leaders like you to navigate your own church through the Malphurs Group's revitalization process. The course leverages a blend of video training that's hosted by our revitalization experts and team and actionable workshops that are led by you at your church. Don't worry, we teach you exactly how to run these workshops so you're not going to get confused, you're not going to get overwhelmed, and most importantly, your church is going to start making key decisions and not just having continual discussions. Registration for the full course opens this week on January 15th. The cost is just $4.99. That's an amazing price for our full process. But if you just want to see a sample video right now, you've still got 2 weeks. Registration does not close until February 1st, so you can watch a sample video and download the free ebook, Preparing Your Church for Revitalization, at churchrevitalizationuniversity.com, or if it's after January 15th, you can go ahead and register right now. Now, in this week's episode, AJ and I are going to share 3 ways you can know that you're ready to lead your church through revitalization. While it's important to have a structure and a process for revitalization, we're really big proponents of that. At the end of the day, it's all about leadership. The real question is, are you ready at the personal level to lead your church in the process? While there are dozens of leadership characteristics that are beneficial, in this episode we will share the 3 central qualifications that are truly necessary to lead your church through revitalization. To read today's show notes, visit malphursgroup.com/22. That's the number 22. malphursgroup.com/22. Now, let's dive in.
Okay, thanks for joining us again this week. Scott and I have another great topic for you. This week, we're talking 3 ways to know you're ready to lead your church through revitalization.
Yeah, our very first episode, I believe episode 1 was, is our church ready for revitalization? Was the question that we asked in episode 1. And this is kind of a similar question, but it's just a little bit different, which is not, is your church ready for revitalization, but you as the pastor, you as the leader, how do you know that you are ready to lead your church through revitalization? Because your church might need it, but there is still the question of, are you ready? Each of these 3 things are indicators for you to know, hey, I'm ready. And if on any one of them you think, you know what, that doesn't describe me right now, well, then you know what to work on.
Yeah, I really this was sort of accidental, Scott, because I wrote last week's article, you wrote this week's article, but really your 3 points almost are sort of the opposite in some way maybe not the opposite, but they're sort of the way of being able to find success through the mistakes that we talked about last week. And so get us started with your first one. You've got down that you've got to be ready to name your reality.
Yeah, it's so important that you come clean. And what we see with pastors a lot is there's about 85 to 90% honesty level. Pastors tend to see the things that other people don't. They're also often willing to be more honest than most people in the congregation about what's working and what's not working. It's that last 5 to 10% that I'm most concerned with, because there's going to be something about your church that you've invested a lot of time, energy, and effort into. And because you've invested so much of yourself into it, you feel like you have to defend it. And so you're not able to see it clearly, or you're just too close. Does that make sense, AJ?
Yeah.
To really do the revitalization process well, you've got to be willing to be just brutally honest with everything, even that 5 to 10% that you're really defensive of.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think we don't often see pastors who are blind to these things. In a lot of cases, they've simply, in some cases, maybe they've just sort of given up or resigned themselves to the fact that I just have to work within what I have to work with. But that part that they're just sort of, I don't know, suppressing or just like, whatever, that's the way it's going to be here. That's the part that they definitely have got to be able to verbalize with a leadership team. I mean, they can't be honest with themselves without making sure everybody else is on the same page as well. That we
Right.
have some tough things to face and we have to name those so that we're all aware and can work through them.
Yeah, so let me give a couple of concrete examples. I will often hear churches say things like, pastors will say rather, well, we already have a mission statement. I worked on it 3 years ago, and we look at it and it's just not, it's not effective. People just still don't know it. It's not guiding the church. It's not doing the things that a mission should do. And as a result, it's something that needs to be worked on. But because he worked on it by himself 3 years ago, he's not willing to, give that thing up. Same thing
Mm-hmm.
with a vision. Maybe the vision is something that he worked on his own on a retreat, and he felt very emotional about it, but it's just not very good, and you're not seeing the fruit of it in the church, and so it's something that needs to be worked on. So it tends to be some little pet thing that he has invested a lot of himself in it, and um, it echoes the same sentiment that the whole church has. They've got ministries they've poured into emotionally for years, and if the amount of emotion and heart we poured into things was a measure of their effectiveness, then we'd never have to get rid of anything. That's not the measure of it. Did we know you worked hard on it? And we're not saying that you've wasted your time. We're just saying now we've got to redeem the work you've done, take the things that are working, maximize those things, kind of trim down the things that don't work. But you can't do any of that unless you're honest about what's working and what's not working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another point too is that it's not helpful to see that everything is bad. So, just it's really unhelpful for you to think no, everything is fine and to kind of fool yourself. But it's sort of equally troubling to just say, well, everything is terrible, nothing's working. We just need a complete, blank slate. That's not true. I mean, there are things that you can build on, and so being honest with yourself means being honest about those things that are not working, but also, notice the things that are working and be willing to build on those. Sometimes there are little hidden nuggets or in little corners or pockets that you would not have expected. That those are the things that are really working, but those are the things that you can build on.
Yeah, that is a good point. I just had a conversation last week with a pastor that was sort of maybe almost getting himself into the mindset that maybe he was not the leader that the church needed because he wasn't Superman in all aspects of what the church was requiring,
Yeah.
and it's just not always black and white like that. So I mean, he maybe is coming around well to recognizing the reality, but it doesn't mean that there's not other ways of skinning that cat. And in this conversation, it was more so that he just maybe needs a leadership change in the people around him to build up on
Hmm.
his strengths. But
Sure.
um, sometimes naming that reality though might be that exactly. The pastor maybe does have some weaknesses that he's not faced and needs to realize that he's got to build a team around him to be able to bring those levels up.
Yeah, you never know how it's going to turn out. And I think that's the fear of being honest is going, I don't know what the end result of that honesty is going to be. It might be cutting things I like. It could be making positional changes with people that I like. If you're not willing to be honest, you might miss those cues, whatever it
Mhm.
might be. And I'm not saying it won't be painful. And I know that's why you're afraid. But everything worth doing requires some risk, and it starts with being honest. So if you're ready and you're willing to be honest with yourself, then that's step one in being ready to lead your church through revitalization.
Yeah, definitely. That probably is a good segue into point number 2 that you have as well, because a lot of times the reality that needs to be faced is that there is maybe some division or conflict in the church. And so you've got down, Scott, for number 2 here, that you've got to be willing to engage in healthy conflict. So what does that begin
Hmm.
to look like?
Right. So last week, AJ, we talked about how one of the common mistakes that we see is churches that either fail to implement or they start to implement and then backslide on
Hmm.
those. one of the reasons why that happens is because we start to get pushback from people who weren't a part of the process, or even people who were a part of the revitalization process or whatever. But and then what happens is a pastor will get a piece of that pushback and then go, "Oh, you know what? You're right. Okay, we'll delay that. We won't do that." Um, I worked with a church at one point that had made a decision to make some major programming shifts to their midweek stuff. They were going to cut all of it or most of it or something like that. Um, Now, to the congregation's credit, I don't know that they communicated that particularly well or very effectively, which was a problem. And then a couple of people rallied some other folks and really pushed back against these changes, and then they went, "Oh, never mind." And I got a little frustrated when I heard this story because I thought, "No, no, no. You know, you really ought to apologize for how you did it and how you communicated. But if you felt a conviction that the right thing to do was to move on from these programs, you should still follow through with that decision."
Yeah.
So, healthy conflict and being willing to engage in healthy conflict means you're willing to engage people at that emotional level from an emotionally intelligent perspective,
Mm.
right? Like, I'm not going to let their negativity or their anger or their frustration be something that I take on myself and also become angry and frustrated, or that I just want to completely appease, and so I just give them what they want so I don't have to hear that negative emotion. It's something that I can, you know, in a very sort of Mr. Rogers type way, like I can interact with that emotion
Yeah.
without changing my decision. And that is the only way revitalization works, AJ, is
Yeah.
from a leader's perspective. You have to be willing to emotionally, in an emotionally intelligent way, engage with other people's frustrations and issues without compromising the decisions that you made, because you didn't make them flippantly. And if you're going through like Church Revitalization University, or you're working with us one on one, we're never just like, okay, let's cut that program, let's do this thing. It's always done with care, consideration, process, prayer.
Hmm.
Like, we really thought about this and we made this decision. And and your emotions do not counteract my thoughtfulness, prayer, and intentionality that went into making this decision. So
Yeah. Boy, that is great.
that's point two.
That is a mature leadership skill that not everybody possesses, but I believe they have the capacity to learn it. Um, and so, I mean, we've dealt with leaders that already had it, leaders that didn't have it,
Hmm.
and the outcomes are different. Some
Yeah.
people don't have that ability, and it prolongs the conflict, and sometimes it makes things fail. So yeah, that right there is the importance, or that highlights the importance of um, coaching. I mean,
Yeah.
as we complete, like the on-site work, when we're working with churches, and we move into, a year-long coaching process. That's the importance then of having your consultant continue to be in contact with them, talk about these things. Sometimes, you might be able to head off some of these issues just by having somebody that you trust speak into them and help you have the right mindset going into that conflict and how you're going to handle it. So
Yeah.
yeah, this could be a make or break situation.
I think some pastors walk into these situations thinking that the revitalization process is a compromise where you say, okay, we're going to do this new thing, but to make people happy, we'll do this other thing. That is never my perspective. A good revitalization process is a commitment to do what's right. It's not a compromise.
Hmm.
You have to believe that the thing you're doing is the right thing to do. And if you go into it thinking it's a compromise situation, then you're going to be willing to compromise in the future.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And
You
what
have to,
you're willing to compromise will probably increase.
that's right.
You'll
So
start
you have to,
narrowing down, like, what are the, like, let me just finally get down to the very most basic things that I want to see us change, and I'll let them have everything else.
that's right.
Yeah.
And it will never work that way. You
Yeah.
have to have a conviction and a commitment to do what's right. And if you have that, then you'll be willing to work through people's emotions with them and not sort of go back on the decisions that you've made. And that's
Yeah,
really, really important. So if you're
man.
willing to engage in those healthy conflicts, then you're ready to lead your church through revitalization.
Good word, man. Super good. That's really helpful. It's also, I mean, it's kind of a good segue, I think, into your third point here, because I mean, as you're kind of talking about that, I mean, the word vision is just flashing, in my head here, because if we're leading with vision, and vision is something that needs to be spoken before you start talking about strategy and change. I mean, vision exists before you figure out how you're going to accomplish it. And if
Right.
you're preaching vision and you're talking about it and you're communicating it well, and people are grasping the vision before they have any idea how they're going to get there, once you start talking about it, you're already ahead of the game. And so that leads us into point 3, not to belabor it here. You've got down being confident in God's future, which is kind of a way of talking vision.
Yeah, it is. We meet a lot of pastors, and so maybe this should have been point 1, I don't know, but who just from the outset think that whatever it is all there ever will be, right? We've been, and it's not about size, but you're thinking, we're a church of 75 people. Well, we've been a church of 75 people from before I got here. The positive, the church hasn't really declined much. We've hovered somewhere between 60 and 75 the whole time I've been here, but clearly this thing's never going to grow. It's never going to be more than it is. Okay. You know what I mean? I just meet
Mm-hmm.
pastors a lot who are like, who didn't get into ministry that way. No one got into ministry thinking, I'm going to lead a stagnant, compromising, uninnovative,
That's right.
unevangelistic ministry. No one
Yeah.
got into ministry thinking that. You developed that attitude over a period of years, and you've stopped believing that God wants anything different for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, this is it. This is my lot in life. And I refuse to believe that that's true, because I know that it's God's will that not any would perish. So if there are people that your church can reach with the gospel so that they would not perish, then it's God's will for you to reach them. And again, I'm not talking about it's God's will for every pastor to lead a megachurch. I'm not saying that. It is God's will that every church be making a measurable gospel impact in their community, however you define that.
Yeah.
It's important. It's important. And so, you're not ready to lead your church through revitalization until you accept and believe that God has a better future for your church than what you're seeing right now.
And that future, yeah, that future's there. Gosh, and this is such an exciting thing to talk about with churches. When we're working with a church, we're not creating vision for you. I mean,
Mm-mm.
we're facilitating and helping you with tools and skills that are going to help you understand God's vision for your church and for your team to understand that, and then help you express it. And it exists everywhere. And I love what what you started saying there with the way pastors think. I mean, that's kind of a question that I end up talking with a lot of pastors. A lot of pastors think they're not visionary. They're always more visionary than they give themselves credit for.
Sure.
And one of those things that I always bring up to them is like, what were you? Bring back those emotions and those ideas that you had, when you were candidating for the church and when you first came on. I mean, you saw potential, and what were those dreams that you were feeling back then, whether that was last year or 15 years ago.
Mhm.
If you can get yourself back there, then you can probably find, that original path again. And now with maybe these new skills and this new team that's around you in your church in a different place, they're ready to follow you down that path. But you do have to be confident, in God's future. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, this if you didn't listen to our Christmas week episode, um, I encourage you, and you're struggling with vision and going, "Gosh, does God have anything else for me?" I encourage you to go back and listen to that. We kind of walk through Haggai chapter 2, and I think one of the reasons that churches struggle with this, or pastors struggle with this idea that maybe God doesn't have anything else for me than what I'm seeing, is because they're judging their future circumstances based on what their eyes can see right now.
Mhm.
And so we didn't read this verse. And so people will say, well, we don't have the resources maybe that a bigger church has, or that we used to have, or whatever. But I love this verse in Haggai 2:8. We didn't read this one in that episode, but he says, "The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts," which is the verse that precedes what we did read, verse 9. "The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts." So this is just this idea that, like, don't worry about what your eyes can see. Don't worry about what your eyes can see. You don't have the money, you don't have the resources, you don't have the people, you don't have the best facility, you don't have the best um, equipment, you don't have doesn't matter. Like, the silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts, which means he'll give you the resources you need when you need them. And so it does not serve you or the Lord or your congregation or your community any good for you to have this negative attitude that God, that nothing good is ever going to happen to you or your church. You have to get over that. If you want to revitalize your church, or you want to lead your church through revitalization, you have to believe, and not in a name it, claim it kind of way, or some sort of The Secret Oprah thing. But these are promises of God. Like,
Yeah.
you stand on those things and believe that they're true and walk confidently in them, and you'll be ready. But if you don't, I mean, the Lord says this, you have little because you don't ask for it. And
Yeah.
I think we need to take that on the chin. Pastors will say, "This is my lot in life." And I'll be like, why would you expect anything different? You have completely given up. Sorry, I get a little frustrated with this because
Yeah.
like, they think it's their lot in life, but they've stopped asking God for more.
You got
Oh,
you got to be looking to the future that God has. And every church has a potential. Maybe you could say this: every church has a potential greater than it is today, greater than its present reality.
absolutely.
Hey, Scott, thanks for this article this week. Episode 22, again, you can get it at malfirsgroup.com/22, just the numbers 22. And Scott, tomorrow is a really big day around here because, of course, this is, if you're listening to this week, we're talking January, second week of January.
Yeah.
And this week on the 15th, we are opening registration for
Yeah,
churchrevitalizationuniversity.com.
buddy. Yeah, buddy. Churchrevitalizationuniversity.com. So just if you've not heard and you're like, what is that? It's a really long URL, first of all, is what it is. You got to write it in very carefully so that you're sure you spell the word revitalization with a Z.
It's your first test of being a revitalizing pastor. Can you
Yeah,
get
you
to
know
the
what?
website?
I didn't think about this. If you're in the UK, because we have some UK listeners and some Australian, actually, we have quite a few. We have a big Australian audience. Did you know that, AJ?
Hey, Australia.
Yeah. So they spell revitalization with an S.
Right.
So you
Lots
want
of
to,
non-US places do.
that's right. So it's revitalization with a Z, just like the podcast. Churchrevitalizationuniversity.com. And you can register starting January 15th. And there's a 2-week window to sign up. And then the course will begin on February 1st. And so just so you know in advance, it's a drip course. So we do this on purpose. We don't want you getting ahead. We want you to do session 1, and then the next month do session 2, and then the next month do session 3, and then the next month do session 4. There are 4 sessions. Session 1 is on mission and core values, establishing those things and working on them. Session 2 is on discipleship pathway. What does it mean to make mature disciples? And then a concrete, actionable workshop of assessing your ministries and reorganizing your ministries so that you actually make and mature more disciples in your church. Session 3 is vision and strategy objective selection. So walking you through our 3-part vision process and then selecting 3 to 5 strategic objectives for the next 12 months. And then session 4 is implementation. So walking you through how to build out action plans and how are we going to commit to action and do the things that we say that we want to do moving forward. So it's a comprehensive strategic planning process, AJ, and it's priced at $4.99. So hopefully you don't have to get congregational vote or finance committee approval. It should be low enough that you can just act on that, is our hope. So yes, if you're listening, registration opens up January 15th.
Hey, thanks for listening this week, everybody. We love you. Our prayer is that your ministry will be blessed. Our ministry here is helping churches break through barriers to maximize their impact for Christ, and that's what we're trying to do every week here on the podcast and through churchrevitalizationuniversity.com, and of course the one-on-one work that we do with lots of churches all across the country, and all the connections and conversations and things that we do globally as well. That's what the Malfers Group is all about. We'll be anxious to have you back next week for episode 23. Until then, be blessed, my friends.